You know what happened to him. So it was, you know, absolutely outrageous what happened. PA was cut. They turned the PA down. I think some of the roadies managed to grab our amps off as well. I remember Steve Jones actually was on the drums for some reason and going, "Why is the fucking power cut turned off?" You know, he was just an arsehole. And I remember thinking at the time, going, he used to be my hero, you know, the Sex Pistols. I love the Sex Pistols, so really, you know, it went down in my estimation.
And they just completely finished the gig. And the Undertones were in tears. I was full of unspeakable rage. I have never been so angry in my life. And I just said to the other lads that night, if we don't get off Percy's label, I'm leaving the band. I'm not going to work with him ever.
So they felt, the Chords, I know the Chords at the time felt really embarrassed, really pissed off with Percy about that, you know, that occasion, what happened.
And we had a showdown with him at Polydor on the Monday, which was a very frightening experience because, as I say, nobody said no to Jimmy Percy, and we said, we want out. After what you did, they're our friends, the Undertones. You could have killed somebody on stage. Basically, we're out of here.
I know the consequences of that was bad for the Chords because they were on his label and they insisted on leaving his label after that. And you know, was that a good idea or not? Maybe, I'm not sure, but you're gonna have to ask him that.
I think the day after, Buddy came in to see me, and he was really, you know, upset. And he said that I'd rather give up. He said, "That's it." He said, "We don't want to record for him anymore."
To be honest, it's kind of felt honoured that they left. Because, you know, they didn't have to. Could have just went on and put the single out. But it shows you how much they were pissed off about it as well. So, you know, they stuck to their principles in a way, which is kind of very admirable.
We were in limbo then for a long, long time. We had John Peel sessions then, and that was marvellous.
So what saved us was that we went into the studio to do a Peel session up at the BBC in Maida Vale, and still to this day I think it's the best thing we ever did on tape. I think it was just the two producers caught the chords at their best. It was basically live, very little overdubs. I don't know whether it was the anger or the energy that came through, but I'm really glad that it got released in the end on Detour.
I've been listening to Peel for years, you know, as a kid for 13, 14, and then he's going on. It's surreal because you're going, you talk about me, you know. And it was just a great feeling.
Yeah. Those BBC sessions were really unique.
Then interest started to happen again until we were picked up by Virgin, and it was really weird. There were a few record companies that were interested, but Virgin said to us, we will give you a 9-album deal, 9 years, you know. Oh, what? 9 years? We were only, like, Chris was 17. It seemed like a lifetime. I think because of The Who and, like, Slade, Polydor was, you know, and Virgin was only starting at that point, and we weren't quite sure what a big mistake.
Polydor thought, well, what have we got here? We've got 4 mavericks who don't do what they're told, and they had to toe the party line.
I mean, everyone knew the problems we had with Polydor were well documented because the jam were on Polydor, and it was kind of like, you know, we were supposedly coming across to the same audience as them, so it was always been difficult for us to do that without sounding sort of like angry or bitter about it. It was something we could do about it because we were signed without any agreement for us to do anything, you know. I think there was a clause in the contract with Jimmy Percy because it was to do with Polydor, but Polydor had the first option, so they took us up. And you know, it's kind of I think they took us up as if like, oh, we might as well just take them on, but didn't really think, you know, any interest in us at the time. So there was always kind of like 2 or 3 other labels that were kind of going for us, but obviously, well, Polydor had the option, they took us on.
And then we signed them direct. And I remember, because we celebrated a little too long, and they played a gig at the Nashville, which they trashed. And I said afterwards that it's a good job that there's no one from the company, because they absolutely trashed the whole set.
Polydor in the end picked up the contract, I think as a result of the Peel session. But I think the cold feet that they'd shown, those cold, dead feet they'd put upon us, I think it showed that they really didn't believe in us. I think they saw us as a backup plan, possibly for the Jam or one of the other bands that they had.
I made sure that they got a fair deal, but I couldn't go to my boss and say, well, give them 60 grand, because he'd say no. Buddy was great. I mean, I loved his total naivety, and he was so naive, it was beyond belief that anyone could be that naive. Really beyond belief. I mean, but to me, that's what I like, because the music business was very cynical, very, and not as bad as now, but it was a very cynical business, and it was refreshing. Buddy was refreshing. Martin was a good bass player, but he couldn't sing to save his life. I mean, that's the only thing that was the drawback with Martin. Billy I liked a lot. I thought he was a good singer. He got it across well. I remember with watching On Top of the Pops, where he was doing the Pete Townsend wheeling his arm, and I mean, I had to laugh because he was looking in the monitor. He was actually looking at himself appearing on Top of the Pops, and it was funny.
But certainly I remember them on Top of the Pops, and I remember thinking that Billy particularly commanded the stage, had a real presence, and you would have put your money on them cracking it and him, you know, being a star. Chris
was a bit on the moody side. I mean, he was, I suppose, what you call the artistic temperament. But he was okay, and I mean, I quite actually enjoyed being with him.
Chris and Martin were always kind of a bit more kind of in the background, you know, brooding, moody. I don't think I've ever exchanged more than about 3 words with Martin, but the other two, Buddy and Billy, more than make up for that with their sort of larger-than-life personalities.
In provincial Britain in the 1980s, all pubs closed at 10:30 during the week. Hotels didn't have bars, not the ones we were staying at. So we'd inevitably retreat to somebody's room, always me and Chris's room, and we'd drink till 3 and then trash the room because there was nothing else to do.
They used to drink like fish. They just used to get whacked, finish the gig, get drunk, and it was all Tennent's, it was all strong lager.
It's addressed to Mr. Halpin, our road manager, and it begins. Dear Sir, it is with regret that I find it necessary to enclose an account for damages to room 53 which you booked for the 19th of May 1980.
Remember going into, I think it was Buddy's room, and the bath was full of beer. Tins of beer, cold water and beer.
And it continues, the room has recently been constructed and therefore newly decorated and furnished. But the deplorable condition in which you vacated the room means that it requires complete redecoration.
And it was a good gig, I remember. We came back and I went to bed and I put the chair against the door to stop any nonsense.
On the large amounts of broken glass, particularly in the bath and on the surrounding floor, empty beer cans and bottles, a torn single sheet and a single divan mattress which appeared to have been urinated on. Not so.
When I got up, I went into Buddy's room and it was quite amazing. In those days, when, as a senior product manager, I could approve the junior product manager if they wanted to spend money, and I was given a stamp, and it was stamped approved Dennis Mundy.
The most disturbing act of vandalism is the act of stamping in indelible ink the words approved Dennis Mundy on walls, ceiling, picture frames, both upholstered bed heads, and on the bathroom tiles, together with the removal and the breaking of the toilet roll holder.
And when I went in, someone had stamped all the wallpaper. It was everywhere. I actually left through the window. I was on the ground floor. I thought, no, I can't deal with this.
I sincerely hope that blah 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 blah. The story behind that, Your Honour, is that just before the tour started, we stole Dennis Mundy's approval stamp from his desk with an indelible ink pad. And the temptation was just too great, I'm afraid. A bit of a cliche, isn't it? Bands breaking up hotels and stuff.
And we got the bill, and I think it was only 300 quid. And I said to Paul, you know, you're going to have to pay this. I can swing a lot of things, but I mean, you know, redecorating a room, I don't think that's...
And we were banned from every Trust House 40 hotel in the country. Particularly proud of that, actually.
really want the first single to let the press, everyone know that here's a band. And they did okay in the press. They had a following. So, you know, for me, that was a good start. You've got to start somewhere. No matter who would have produced it, I think you'd have ended up in the same place. I honestly don't believe that if people had produced, it might have sounded better, who knows, but I don't think it would have done any better. That's the thing. I don't think it was a good song, but it wasn't great. It wasn't, you know, out the box, as they say.
The song Maybe Tomorrow, I think there was some there was some, that I think that was basically about that sort of, the atmosphere that was around in southeast London at the time, with the fears about the NF, you know, and I think they picked up on that and reflected that. You know, I mean, bands like the Manic Street Preachers are doing that sort of stuff today, and it's regarded as very cutting edge and very political. And I don't think the Chords have had their due acclaim for that single. You know, I think it is a real gem. It should have done a lot better than it did in the charts, and it's always been a bit of a mystery to me why it didn't, because everybody who comes into contact with that song loves it.
They wrote and played good songs. That's the difference. If you go back to the Purple Hearts, I mean, I couldn't even tell you what songs the Purple Hearts sang. And there were loads of bands like that. Long, Tall, Shorty, and all sorts of things. There were bands coming out the woodwork.
As soon as Chris came in, I mean, we were doing like Small Faces, Kinks stuff. I said, Taurus Standing News. I used to do it, I'm mad about John Lennon, Working Class Hero, and I used to go, oh no. And then I think Chris had enough of it, and he said, look, try this.
Chris was a good songwriter. It was quite evident from early on that he could write a tune. And I mean, a lot of those other mod revival bands, I didn't think they could write songs. I mean, even Secret Affair, they had one or two good songs, but I really didn't think the album stood up.
And Martin used to write songs, early on he used to write a few more. I Don't Want to Know is a very early favourite. Don't Go Back, we used to start the show with, I think. But they didn't really contribute much. It fell to Chris to do most of it. And obviously I did absolutely nothing. I was just a drummer.
Well, So Far Away's favourite track, but we do the British Way of Life at Justice, I think, at the moment, the way we did it. And there's Maybe It Tomorrow.
But 9 times out of 10, he comes up with the goods.
This stuff's just average, I'll be honest about it. So, you know, but you know, I think most bands have got, who only made 2 or 3 albums, have got like 5 or 10 songs, you know.
But I think he was under a lot of pressure from the Chords. It was the Polydor would schedule a release even if you didn't have a song written. They said, right, you're having a new single out in November, and we saying, we haven't got a song. You've got to go and write one.
I personally think if we had been on another record label, I think that we would have stand a better chance.
When we got to the album, is who was going to produce them, because they didn't want Peter Wilson. Buddy came up with Andy Arthur, and I got Andy in, but I realised that they were a handful. So whoever was going to get the job needed to be able to, you know, have a firm hand on them. And Andy came across as that. He really was a nice guy. He had a good sense of humour. And he did a really good job on the album. I remember going to the studios and you'd open the door and no one was in. And the Redan pub, which was just up the road, they'd be in there. Andy Arthurs would be in there, Roger Wake, the engineer. And they'd all be in there drinking. For me, as a debut album goes, of that era, you really have the Jam, the Clash, the Pistols, which was really their greatest hits, and the Susie. They were the 4 key albums. Well, I don't think that the Chords was far off of him in terms of a debut album.
I was a mod in Stoke-on-Trent in the mid-60s, mid to late 60s. Of course, you've got to remember, the mod thing happened in London much earlier. Stoke-on-Trent was always kind of catching up, but it really kind of took hold there. And I think you'll still find scooter clubs and ska nights and things like that in the Potteries. And having had that sort of background, when it came to wanting somebody to write about the sort of mod revival, I was kind of in the frame, and I kind of homed in on them because there was something about them I liked. They weren't just kind of trying to recreate things that had gone before. They were trying to put a new spin on it, and they'd taken on some of the edginess of punk, which I think is evident on a track like Maybe Tomorrow, you know, which is their kind of magnum opus, I suppose.
We had an entourage follow us out to Paris. There were about 40 British mods came to see us, and they were drinking all day, taking handfuls of medication. I don't know where they got it. And they were just running battles up and down the street between French rockers and teddy boys and these British mods. And at one point we were doing an interview with Paolo Hewitt of Melody Maker then in a hotel, and we heard all this screaming and shouting out the window. So we opened the window and looked out into the alleyway. I think his name's Ray, was standing there, and there was a French rocker with a gun pointed at him from about 20 yards away. And his reaction was to go, "Kill him!" Which was an unusual reaction when you're having a gun pointed at you. I don't think I would, but that was diffused happily, and we got them into the hotel and managed to break it up. And then we did the gig and walked out on stage in front of 1,000 people, and there was no amp. There was no sound coming from Chris's amp. There was no noise, not a peep. So we changed the plug, we changed the fuse, we changed all the leads. And after 5-6 minutes of keeping these wonderful Parisians waiting, we discovered that the road manager, Mr. Halpin, had unplugged the speaker box to put my fan in to keep me cool. So he was only thinking of me. But that rather, there's a bit of a damp squib coming out to that. But we did okay in the end, apart from all the fighting in the hall, which was pretty difficult.
I was invited to a critics preview of Quadrophenia in Wardour Street in some little film theatre. And I remember taking them along, and there were these sort of lofty film critics there with making notes, and I had the Chords spread along the back row with me, you know, and they were all sort of lounging, watching the film, and when they were kind of taking it in, and then the music came on. I remember 5:15, the Who track coming on. Da, 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 da. And all of a sudden I was aware of these 4 guys next to me all going in their chairs, you know, and I think there was a few sniffy looks from the film critics.
I think the Chords, and particularly Buddy, they took some of the criticism too hard. You have to roll with the punches.
I think this is the journalist who was tied to a tree by the Stranglers.
That's right.
I don't advocate that sort of behaviour. However, when she wrote the article, which I can quote you verbatim, but I don't want to sound like some kind of regressive paranoid, I was horrified. She just printed a load of lies. I think from that moment we realised that as a journalist you can just write what you want and you've got no comeback. There's no recourse to the law, and we got scathing reviews.
My view's always been a bad review is the same as a good review. It's one person's comment. It's not going to kill you. If someone writes about you, I don't think there's an artist alive that hasn't had a bad review or bad editorial. It's something you've got to come to terms with quickly.
They never really got behind us. We never made a video. They never had enough copies pressed up. When the album went in at number 30, we were promised it would go up. Maybe number 20 the next week. Nobody could buy it. Nobody could find it. The record shops were all sold out. And the moment was lost again. We were in a constant battle with Polydor, and Dennis Mundy got the brunt of that, unfortunately.
I did their A&R because at the time I was doing the A&R for the Jam and their product manager and Sham. And so I would do both jobs because there was no point assigning an A&R man because I knew the band, I related to the band.
We didn't have an A&R man, so there was no. You get signed by an A&R man inside the band, and sort of like nurtures them, progresses them through. Because we actually weren't signed originally to Polydor, there was no one who looked after us apart from a production manager, who was the guy called Dennis Munday, who just oversaw loads of things with Susan the Banshees, the Jam, Roxy Music, and the Who. I think he was pretty busy. But there was no one really sort of like look up. We didn't have a manager either, so it was a. We used to work up Polydor ourselves 2 or 3 times a week, usually at Nick Records. Get pissed, cause a nuisance, so that obviously went down well. But no, it was basically hands on ourselves doing it.
They didn't have a lot of direction, which was always their problem. As a group, it was like dealing with an octopus. You chop one leg off and there'll be another leg coming round the corner.
We had a lot of screaming rows with him, although in retrospect I realised he was doing his best for us. It was like a surrogate manager, really, Dennis, and I'm grateful for the time and the work that he put in.
I remember mixing some demos, and each one would go up and turn his instrument up. And you sit there and think, no, this is stupid, because it's going to end up with everything's going to be louder than everything else. And there was an element of that about it.
There was a lot of, they were too strong. You know, I think Chris probably was the leader because he wrote the songs, but everyone else was weighing in with their opinions as well. And they shot themselves in the foot a hell of a lot, I think. You know, they didn't make the right decisions at times.
When something's missing, they wanted another track, and I said, no, you've got to go with that because it's commercial. And they said, well, no, we want to do this because it's a better song. And I said to them, well, that doesn't mean it's going to be a hit. A great song doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a hit record from it. It doesn't. Yeah, a hit record is a completely different animal.
We didn't really have sort of a manager, and we didn't have sort of a management behind us to coordinate and organise those sorts of things, so we just really left in the hands of Polydor to do what they did, and we wouldn't have known at the time whether they were doing it properly.
My job was to coordinate everything. You know, from when they go into record to get the sleeve done, that kind of thing. You basically, and to take care of the market.
I actually think that they were quite fortunate that they were with Polydor, because I think a lot of other labels, and I think, were just trying to make a fast buck, and they just saw it as a fad. And at least there were some people, well, I think there were, I mean, they'd know more than me, but there were some people that seemed to give them the time, and there seemed to be a bit of thought behind the way, you know, things were produced and what have you. So I think that's probably to their advantage in terms of the artistic records they put out, that they didn't rush into it.
Maybe signing to Polydor as well was a bad idea because they had the jam. So they were Polydor were concentrating on the jam, and the Chords were second fiddle. So they should have maybe gone to somebody else, Virgin Records or something, be compared to the jam because they're on the same label, which we wanted to get away from that, from the jam comparisons, you know. So they should have, again with guidance, they probably would have signed a different label. And things might have turned out for the better, who knows. Sorry, Andy Ferguson and Anderson's definitely managed to offer to manage the Chords, but they turned them down. And I don't know why, they got all their offers as well, I think, from various people. So they never had a proper manager. I know, you know, all groups, especially, you know, you're starting out, especially you're almost nearly made it, you need that extra pushing, that extra experienced person to make it happen.
We were approached at one time by the Amatones management, and I was all for it, and his idea was to get us out of Polydor and get us on Cyan or WEA. His name's Annie Arthurs. Why we didn't, I have no idea. It was perplexing because he'll take 10%. We got 10% of nothing, man. I mean, let him take it. He's given us a direct. No, can't be trusted. 10%. Ridiculous.
The lack of management was our Achilles heel. We were 4 kids fighting each other with a road manager who was Chris's best mate and had been the drummer previous to me. Prior to me, I should say. It was just 5 strong-willed, headstrong idiots, and we didn't know what direction we were going in or how to go in that direction. We didn't have a plan. We didn't have a clue. We just went from one crisis to another.
At the end of the day, it's all down to kind of personalities. There were 4 very, very different personalities, which